Hello, everybody. Just want to make sure that people in the room can see the slides. Good number of people in the room, lovely to see. I will say, if you're in the room, might as well begin with this one. Masks are mandatory, so I've been asked to explicitly remind people of the masking policy at IETF this year across the board. If you are attending in person, you are required to wear a regionally approved mask, so N95, KF94, and the rest certified equivalent. I understand the IETF is supplying masks as well if anybody needs, but please ensure that you are wearing a mask at all times. Even if you are asking a question of presenters, the exception, of course, being if you are presenting, you are not required to wear a mask in person. Okay, a few other admin things, and we'll get started. From Notewell, standard stuff. So the IETF followed the intellectual property rights disclosure rules as listed on this slide. And I believe most presentations you will see this. So please make sure you're aware that any IETF contribution is that's covered by patents and patent applications. You must disclose that fact or not participate in the discussion. IETF expects you to file such IPR disclosures in a timely manner. I'm hoping you have done so. In a period measured in days or weeks, not months. IETF prefers that most liberal licensing terms possible are made available for IETF stream documents. And the definitive information is in RFC 5378. Moving on, for audio and video, of course, IETF routinely makes recordings of online and in-person meetings available online. If you're participating in person and choose not to wear a red do not photograph lanyard, then you consent by default to being recorded. Okay. And if you speak at a microphone, appear on a panel, of course, or carry out official duty as a member of the IETF, then you consent to appearing in recordings of you at that time. And if you participate online and turn on your camera and or microphone, then you consent to appear in such recordings. The privacy and code of conduct. As a participant, any IETF activity, you acknowledge that written, audio, video, and photographic recordings of you might be made public. Personal information you provide to the IETF will be handled in accordance with policies. Yes, I'm told I'm breaking up left and right, so hold on, I'm going to mute and unmute. Is this any better? Hoping it works. Let's find out. As a participant or attendee, you agree to work respectfully with other participants, and please contact the Ombudsman stream if you have any questions or concerns about this. Of course, the code of conduct is in RFC 7154 and anti-harassment procedure in 7776. Recap of the goals of the IETF. Fabulous group focused on longer-term research issues related to the internet, while the parallel organization, which is the IETF, focuses on shorter-term issues of engineering and standards making. The IETF conducts research. It is not a standards development organization, but of course important to help bridge the two sides. So while the IETF can publish informational and experimental documents in the RFC series, its primary goal is to promote development of research collaboration and teamwork in exploring research issues related to internet protocols, applications, architecture, and technology. And the primer for IETF, participants at IETF, of course, is RFC 7418. So moving on to the fun stuff. Welcome to ANRW, everybody. I'm really glad you could make it, both those who are in person and those attending remotely. It's lovely to have people join. I want to make a special thanks to the program committee this year, in particular because it was a very competitive season. We had 4 or 5 premier venues all running at about the same time. So the people who volunteered for this committee, a particular thanks, because everyone I know had multiple commitments around the same time. On a personal level, someone who couldn't be with us is my co-chair, TJ. And to be honest, TJ deserves so much of the credit for actually putting this together. Without him, I honestly couldn't say where this would be. So TJ, if you're in the room, thank you. And if you're not in the room, everybody know that TJ did a marvelous job here. Also, thanks to the review task force, Ethan and Johanna. They did a marvelous job in just looking over reviews, making sure they were in order, positive, constructive, and so on. So thank you both for that. And of course, thanks to the sponsors of ANRW specifically, which are Akamai and Comcast. So logistics and links, the program, the paper PDFs, and so on are all available online. I'm breaking up once again. One sec. Okay. And I'm going to try and wrap this up quickly so I don't continue to break up. I'm presenting the program overview in reverse order. So this afternoon, we have a set of invited talks to broach a new potential area of investigation for the IRTF around formal methods and verification in protocols and development. So please come back this afternoon because I anticipate these will be a fabulous set of talks. But in this section, we have a keynote and then the 4 papers that were accepted for publication. I want to first introduce Lucas Pardue, who has joined from Cloudflare. And he's going to give this interesting talk called Layer 4 3/4. I work with Lucas on a regular basis, and he and I have frequent conversations, and the questions that come up are actually very interesting. The layering model in particular has done very well, as we all know, for the evolution and sustainability of the internet. But I think increasingly in many domains, we are starting to see that the exchange of information or signaling or cooperation between layers is somehow increasingly important or relevant. So I saw Lucas give this talk a few weeks ago, and I know he was really excited to give it at this venue. So Lucas, if you are around, I am going to hand off to you as soon as I load the slides. One sec.
I can do a microphone check while we're waiting. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Welcome slides. I'm not seeing... Lars, I hear you're in the room. I'm not seeing 4 3/4 here. Lucas, do you have your slides handy?
It might have just been a timing issue with getting them up to the data tracker in time for Meet Echo to upload them. Let's see.
Okay. Sorry, audience. No. Okay. I think there is a way to...
And for the interest of time, I'll probably just do a screen share from my local machine, if that's okay.
Yep. I'm going to hand over control to you.
Okay.
Thanks, Lucas. Take it away.
Am I sharing? Here we go. 100. Just bear with me. Okay. I have to do entire screen. Ooh. Is that working? It doesn't appear to be working either. Yes, you can see my cursor, but not anything else.
Okay, hold on. Wait a minute, one sec. Manage meeting materials at the top right. No luck on the sharing on your side?
No.
The data tracker.
Melvin, could you potentially share the slides for me?
Yes, hold on.
If you could just load up the PDF, we'll have to do it kind of old school.
Oh,
Apologies
actually,
everyone for the wait.
No, Lucas, I am looking now and I don't see the 4 3/4 in the data tracker at all.
Okay, that was submitted last night. Maybe we've just crossed paths on that.
Okay,
it
hold
wasn't
on.
approved. Let me email you a copy quickly.
I might, in the worst case, actually change the order of these things while I wait. Let's do that. How do you, oh. No. Have you sent them?
So that should be on the way. I copy Colin in as well, just in case.
Colin, if you're there, I'm tempted to switch the order of events and do the keynote as a finisher.
I've got the slides now. I'll just upload them.
Okay.
Okay, the slides are uploaded. So if you press refresh in the meeting material.
Keynote, here we go. Okay. So except I'm not seeing it in the share list. Hold on. So I see it in the data tracker. When I update the meeting notes, I see it in the list. If I go to share, preloaded slides, it is not in the list. Everybody getting it. Hope we're not the only group that has difficulty with. 1 sec. seeing it in the share slides list. Fabulous. Okay, your show, Lucas. Thank you.
There we go. I've got control of these slides. Excellent. Thank you very much for everyone for their patience. Thank you to the chairs for inviting me to do this talk. I was super excited to come and do this in a venue with a live audience and to be there in the room. Unfortunately, I came down being ill. So I'm going to preface this with the whole shaboodle of delays with I'm ill, so be kind on me. So I'll be quick because we spent some time trying to get to this point. I'm Lucas Pardo. I'm an engineer at Cloudflare on the protocols team, working on technologies like QUIC and TLS and HB2 and HB3, these kinds of layer 7 or downwards protocols. And I kind of take the view that the layering model isn't brilliant for some of the kind of work that my team does. It helps, but it's also an impedance somewhere because we're often talking cross layers and problems that exist somewhere in the ether. So this talk is kind of a tongue-in-cheek view to communicate to people who aren't us the kind of problems that we face. So briefly, just in case you don't get the reference to the talk title, this refers to, platform 9 3/4 that comes from the Harry Potter universe. If you came just to get Harry Potter memes or jokes, you'll be pretty disappointed. And mainly because, today's talk is focusing on layer 4 3/4. That's mainly because our layering model doesn't go up to 9. It's restricted to 7. So, this is a familiar model that we're used to. Some people might call it a layer cake. We know that the cake's a lie, and we should just ignore it. Or at least that's my opinion anyway. And the reason is because it's detached from reality. It's a work of fiction. You can pretty much do anything with it that you'd like, and you'll be fine. Sorry, just go back here. I went to the next slide and I missed it myself. Obviously, I've got a bit of brain fog here. Yeah, I'll just flip back and forth between these two slides. What's the difference? I turned it upside down. It's barely noticeable. There's like hardly anything that would have changed here. And that's kind of funny because it reminded me of something else, actually. Some of you might know I'm Welsh. I grew up in Cardiff, the capital of Wales. Yeah, they did the layers in this order, reminded me of something. And that's Cardiff Central train station. And you might say, what? Like, why is that the case? And if you look closely, it's probably too small to see here. But if you look at the platform numbers, they're in the kind of central column of the image here. They go from 1 through to 8. I see Jonathan in the chat mentioned layer 8. We're not going to talk about that one today, but maybe some of the other things that you see if you very quickly look at that image. And I think beyond the ordering that we have here, the interesting fact is, well, not fact, sorry. The interesting observation that I had is that we could analogize kind of transport or internet protocols in some way to kind of train stations and trains. So bear with me for this analogy for a bit. I'd say that they're indicative of communication stacks insofar as like hundreds of years ago, people you'll never get to meet had some lofty goals in improving the movement of things from A to B, and they made well-designed intentions and design decisions that lay the foundation for the future generations to come. Those train tracks are pretty good structured guides for the movement of things, and the vessels that move on those tracks can carry various kinds of loads, and they can adapt to the changing needs of consumers. But sometimes those plans don't go, they don't play out the way that they'd hoped, or that the needs change in such a way that the tracks and the foundations aren't quite right. And because train tracks and stations are physical things, it can be hard just to rip them out and swap something in. That takes time and planning and dedication. And maybe like you're stuck with what you've designed and that's it. And that comes back to, our layer cake. Sometimes, we have these layers and they don't really serve much purpose to how people use the internet today. So for me, I just kind of remove that existence of these layers from my mind. I could just take layer 5 out here, throw it in the bin and everything's fine. And you might say, well, you can't do that in real life, but actually that's something that Cardiff Central train station already did. They did this in the 60s, well ahead of OSI. They were really paving the way, to use another pun. But it's not just about using or ignoring unused parts. What about if you want to extend things beyond the initial design intent? Cardiff Central train stations, like ahead of us again here, they needed to add another platform for carrying different kinds of traffic. So there is actually a platform 0 at Cardiff Central. I used to catch a train there myself. What about other things? They've also crammed in several lines between platforms. I mean, like, I don't know who, like, in terms of end users that's supposed to serve, but it serves different kinds of traffic. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I'm sure the train nerds in the room probably have a very well justified explanation for me. You might be laughing, you might be very confused by all of this, but what I'm attempting to illustrate is pretty straightforward, that there's only really 2 3/4 layers of things that we need to care about in this room today for this talk. And those familiar with Harry Potter will be familiar with the obvious thing to do in this circumstance, that you just put those 2 things together and you just run at them as fast as you can to see where the boundary will take you. So, trying to return back to reality somewhat. In my view, these are the only layers that count. And this is the boundary between them. You might balk at layer 3 being removed. Surely, the internet protocol and the internet are important. I would tend to agree. A lot of the work at Cloudflare does is about helping to build a better internet. And we try to do that. So it's not completely opaque to us or not there. But when it comes to a focus at the internet or the web and the way that people and humans interact with that, I don't really want to spend any mental energy on IP details. And that's because end users don't really care. They don't access services via IP. The direction of travel is that they should be becoming, well, the world is probably becoming less reliant on client IPs anyway. We're seeing this in the work in the IETF in terms of oblivious protocols for various different application protocols on the top of them, where we can, the traditional use of client IP as a vector for authorization or authentication is kind of not so good in terms of privacy and so on. So we won't dig into that topic today. It's a very rich idea. Maybe some of the other talks will, I don't know. But yeah, this is one of the few reasons I think layer 3 can be ignored safely. So I just want to move on from that onto some of the other reasons I think this is important. It's because it's what I spend most of my day job on, and the team I work in does. I talked about some of the protocols we support on the edge, and that our team is responsible for servicing. And there's other things there like WebSocket and gRPC. If you're not familiar with those, I won't be going into much detail on them, but they help give a picture that many people think it's the web and that HTTP is a protocol that powers the web, but there's other services that build upon these. They might have user agents or end users, but they could be API traffic, not necessarily just people browsing page to page. And the reason that a company like Cloudflare it does what it does, it provides intermediation between clients and origins, and that can provide speed, reliability, and improvements. But it also provides scale to clients from a distributed network, but also a scale in a different term to the origins. For people who operate these things, it can be difficult to keep up with the latest trends in technology. So there's a long tail of cheap shared hosting or VPS services that have no hopes of kind of getting their stacks to support these latest and greatest technologies. And by having an edge in front of them, you can enable that a bit more quickly, or provide this kind of serverless edge compute platform that some of you might be familiar with. And beyond the layer 7 protocols I've mentioned there, the team's also responsible for a product called Spectrum, which is more at the layer 4, things like TCP and UDP. And we do a few layering violations to help provide some added value on top of those. And these are layering violations in the good sense to provide some value for people. But that we provide some specialized support for other protocols that maybe sit between, 4 and 7. You see here on the right-hand side, SSH, RDP, and Minecraft, which got me interested. I don't know much about Minecraft at the time when we took on ownership of this Spectrum product. And if you look, there's a little asterisk that says Minecraft Java Edition is supported, but Minecraft Bedrock Edition is not supported. My curious brain made me want to understand the difference there. Again, that's a whole talk title in its own. If you're not familiar with Minecraft, you go visit these links. It's quite interesting what the differences are. It basically boils down to TCP versus UDP, but I won't digress here too much. The interesting thing is, there's Wireshark dissectors. Those previous links have like pages upon pages of schema and definition of the protocol language. They're not at the IETF, but the amount of detail there is quite astonishing if you're not familiar. And I was thinking Quake was the only supported protocol in Wireshark, but no, there are indeed dissectors. But anyway, that's kind of an ambling, abstract way of talking about this topic. If I've lost you, I'm sorry. If you want to tune in again, great. We're going to get more into some nitty-gritty details right now and talk more in the specific terms here. So talk about HTTP. This is a layer 7 protocol. Sometimes we forget what the acronyms actually stand for. The question would be, does this mean the Hypertext Transport Protocol? Sometimes I hear people say that. I'll quote Mark Nottingham from IETF 99, who said that Roy Fielding knows whenever you call it the Hypertext Transport Protocol, because it means the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. We might be splitting hairs to say, well, what's the difference? What is a transport protocol? I was speaking recently with Marwan to even discuss, is UDP really a transport protocol or not? But again, I don't want to digress. To help frame some of this discussion and why I think it matters, I want to talk about the view from Cloudflare's edge and some of the kind of traffic profiles that we see from real users contacting our edge on a daily basis. So to get into that, first of all, we offer something called radar.cloudflare.com. It's a website containing up-to-date statistics about various things that our edge sees. This is just a snippet of HTTP and TLS traffic taken from April. So it's a little bit out of date, but if you were to check that today, you'd see some maybe similar numbers, maybe different numbers. So go and take a look. Just the high-level summary of this view is that it's quite clear that most of the traffic that our edge sees is encrypted HTTP2 and HTTP3. 99% of the traffic, according to this view at that time, was HTTPS, so that's encrypted. Only 9% of the traffic was HTTP 1.x, so 1.1, we'll call that just for convenience. So when you combine those two figures together, that's a tiny, tiny proportion of requests to Cloudflare are being made over plain text HTTP 1.1. I think sometimes when we think about HTTP in the web, there's this presumption about how it worked maybe a decade or so ago, and that's very different to today. So when we're thinking about how to design and scale services against like an older view of the protocol, those assumptions don't hold up anymore. And I think, well, what I will try and illustrate through the next few slides is that the tooling and the methodology we have is maybe not entirely fit for the purpose of how these layer 7 protocols have evolved and are changing. And to maybe help illustrate that sometime, or in some way, very briefly, I'd like to think or encourage people to think about how these protocols look on the wire. So the astute amongst you will understand maybe that I flipped the layer cake upside down now. So from the bottom, we have layer 7 in terms of this HTTP semantic. If you're not familiar with the protocol, it's a request response protocol where clients send request messages and server sends response messages back to each other. And these are kind of an abstract thing. They have requirements and constraints, but they don't have a strict serialization. That's the duty of the HTTP version itself, to describe how those abstract semantics map onto the wire. So on the left, we've got 1.1, where we take this message and we convert it into an ASCII serialized form, and we put it into a TLS record because we only care about encrypted traffic here. That would then span multiple TCP segments. In the middle column, we again have the same HTTP request response message semantics, but instead of ASCII, these map into the binary frames. So we have this splitting up of headers, so the kind of the metadata for the message, and the data frame which carries the message content. But again, those get mapped into a TLS record and sent over TCP segments in a very similar way. On the right-hand side is probably the most different aspect here. This is QUIC, the quick transport, with messages getting mapped into frames, very similar to HB2, but before they go down into anything below them, they get mapped into a QUIC stream, which is a transport primitive that's available that solves all of the head of line blocking stuff in QUIC that we're not going to talk about today. But those map into QUIC packets and they get sent in UDP datagrams. So keeping that in mind, that this is how it kind of looks. Let's look at some statistics very quickly. Radar offers this high-level global view of traffic trends. This is an interactive map. So I'd encourage you to go and visit and play around, maybe look at your country or where you reside, interesting things like that. Dark orange is where the share of HB3 traffic is highest, going to lighter for lowest. I don't know, maybe that distribution surprises you at the time. I'm sure it's changed today due to traffic trends, etc. Maybe it doesn't. Let me know in the chat. Back in May 2021, QUIC, the transport protocol, launches RFC 9000. Cloudflare has been supporting this for a long time. We did a blog post at the time. It's hard to see here, but the traffic share at the time was 12.4%, or call it 12 if we're rounding down. And in the meantime, HB3 draft has finally been published this year. And we're kind of keen to take a long-term view of the usage. Just as a headline statistic, in that time, over the last year, we've seen the traffic global requests, sorry, the share of HB3 traffic on a global scale rise from about 12% to over 25%, which is, a doubling, which is pretty decent, I'd say. But in some countries that's even higher. So I do encourage you to go and take a look and have a deep dive, or visit that blog post where we'll dig into some long-term trends over time, to show maybe the wax and wane of traffic profiles over the last year. I'll summarize them very briefly here, but to look at this, what we have is HB3 in the blue, that you can see shortly after the RFC 9000 came out. HB3 traffic for us overtook HB 1.1, and it's just continued to grow ever since. At the top, HB2 is kind of been bumbling along at the same rate, and 1.1 is still there, but it is a very small percent. Just to describe these briefly, if I didn't cover that, these are measured in requests per second that our global edge sees for human or likely human traffic. So we rate traffic whether we think it's a bot or human, and this is solely for human traffic. You can filter this down into bot traffic. I'll present some slides differently, and the traffic profiles are quite different, which I find pretty interesting too. If we're going to break those requests down into different user agents, we know that support doesn't roll out unilaterally, and that different work needs to be done, different priorities, etc. So just looking at these three browsers, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, we can see different kind of rollouts happening there. Say Chrome is now at around 60%. Firefox is kind of similar today, or back in May at least, but you can see that there's been some gradual kind of ramp up or rollout. Some of this is affected by Cloudflare customers who control whether they offer HB3 to the edge, but by measuring everything kind of globally, and then looking at these more specific details, we can get a feel for how the different user agents are also rolling out support, maybe experimental or by default, etc. So can see on the bottom left there, Safari kind of lagging behind slightly Chrome and Firefox. I understand that these numbers might be changing soon as Safari rolls out support more widespread for HB3 by default, but we'll remain to be staying tuned and to see. This is how it looks in terms of global requests. For time, I'll just kind of gloss over this one slightly. This is how we look in terms of share. Similarly, Chrome is pretty dominant there. And this reflects just global share of user agents to some extent. If we took Chrome out of the picture, you can see more clearly the different kinds of changes that are happening for these browsers. The blog post goes into more detail for some of the observations here, so I won't go into any more detail. But I would like to focus on this slide a bit more because this looks at bots, which, good bots and bad bots, we might spend a whole session on that one, but these are typically bots related to search engines or social media entities who like to access the internet to do stuff. So you can see here, the headline is that there's hardly any or zero HB3 usage. They're very much in a 1.1 or 2 world. You can look at some of the public information about how these bots decide what version to pick. It's pretty opaque and obtuse. I struggle to get any more answers or insight into that. I'd love for people to have a chat if anyone knows anyone. But aside, it's an interesting in respect to HB3 usage is pretty high for users and low for bots. So with that all in mind, binary framing, as I mentioned, for HB2 and HB3, it was a solution to a problem to let us mitigate some stuff I'm not going to talk about, but mainly about performance and header line blocking issues that can affect web page loading. And it does that job. So it's a solution to all our problems. Well, text-based HTTP, so HB 1.1 or other older versions, have a pedigree in providing quirks, and recent examples include this idea of request smuggling, an attack that's kind of resurged lately. I won't go into the details here for brevity, but despite all of the baggage, it's pretty well exercised and understood by technically minded folks who ever care to look into this stuff around HB, performance and behaviors and quirks, etc. Yet, like I said, HB2 and 3 constitute the majority of web traffic as far as we see. So how can we best characterize the quirks of those specific HB versions? There's a bunch of tools, H2 spec, H3 spec, H2 load, there's Chrome net logs, there's qlogs, which is a specification and that we're working on in the quick working group, along with some tooling to support that. There's probably other things that I'm not familiar with. Maybe you have a favorite. I don't know. These aren't so much analyzing the protocol, but analyzing conformance or implementation behavior specific to protocols, whether they implement musts or shoulds or maybes, etc., and how those things interact with each other. They're all pretty good, useful tools. I use them myself, but in general, I would say, in my opinion, the general coverage of H2 or H3 as an internet community seems lacking, given that the widespread support for this protocol. When things go wrong, people come to me to ask for help, and I'm always happy to give it to them. But I think the scaling of that knowledge and the debuggability is something that we could do better on. And this talk is part of that activity. So I want to use some examples to illustrate this. I don't want to pick on Chrome solely, but most people might have seen these kinds of error messages. Hands up if you have. This often just gets shown, or something like this, when anything goes wrong. So, if you've seen this message, how did you solve it? Did you just hit reload? Probably, and then it went away. But if you look online and you search for these things, you hit interesting websites that give you interesting recommendations, like flush the speedy pockets, which I don't really know what that means. Could just be a typo, could be something else. We go from speedy into HB2. Maybe you've seen that error. Again, here's another website that recommends turning your antivirus off and on again. Haha. I don't know if that's funny or not. A bit scary in my mind. And then we get to quick, the latest and greatest. One of the recommendations, like in the top of Google search, is if you're stuck from all of these different methods that don't actually help anything, then contact Google customer support. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to contact Google customer support, but you would have maybe mixed results, I would say. But I actually did. I had a problem. I went online. I logged a bug after speaking to some folks, and they responded very quickly, and it was great. But unfortunately, we all have priorities in our work, and so that bug has remained open and sits there. It could potentially help in a few different ways, but we're all busy, we'll all get prioritized, I understand. So in the meantime, we have to look for other solutions or other ways to look at problems. And beyond just Chrome, I want to focus on a specific example of this kind of thing where the spec says what we must and may do, and then what in reality actually happens. So this is the idea of taking a request message and serializing it to the wire. And what the HB3 spec says is that you must have this full set of pseudo headers, which articulate, say, for the request, the method, the path, the host, and so on. But every request needs a method. So this could be get, post, head, various verbs that can be included in there that apply to all versions of HTTP. But if you don't include that method, then the request is malformed. So they must be treated as a stream error. So that means resetting the stream with a specific error code, and that you may serve a response before that happens, before resetting the stream. So what I did is create a malformed client that did this on purpose. This is literally, if you think of old school HTTP, like the first thing that you would see in the request line is the method. So it's like the first thing that could ever go wrong. And I tested that client, a HTTP3 client, against various implementations that operate on the internet, and see what happens. So to briefly summarize, 4 of these returned a bad request. 1 returned 4 or 5 method not allowed, which I thought was quite amusing because there was no method. And others sent a reset stream, which is kind of aligned to what the spec says, but they sent a different error code. And some just closed the connection outright, which is pretty terminal, given that these connections can hold or articulate many requests. But I want to stress that none of this is bad behavior. They all kind of rejected it, and ultimately in HTTP, that's generally good enough. I don't think anyone is there as the protocol police, making sure that if you receive the wrong error code, you take action. But sometimes these things can result in systematic errors as they propagate through. So it's not always clear if this is okay or if this is bad. And maybe as a community, we need to take a look and see if there's anything more we can do. And sometimes there's just not. Sometimes it's the equilibrium that's good enough. Something else that happened different to that, a while back, Netflix did some work about HB2. They were looking to implement it and looked at the protocol and then compared that to implementations, and were able to identify a number of attack vectors that could result in denial of service on HB2 implementations. And there's a large community effort, responsible disclosure to kind of create proof of concepts of these attacks and integrate fixes, and the community did a great job of that. But if you're writing a H2 implementation today, is that information is accessible to you? You've come after the whole train of implementers. Maybe you've read about these things, but you don't understand them. How can we make sure that those test cases apply to diverse HB2 implementations still? There's code, you could run them, that's great, but is it sufficient? And the reason this is important, I'll just pick on one of these. One of the attacks was a ping flood. So this is a HB2 ping frame. You can see here the description is that an attacker sends continual pings that could cause buildup and a DOS. And the reason this is interesting is because Cloudflare implemented mitigations for these H2 DOS attacks that affected our specific implementation. We weren't affected by them all, but we were affected by some, and one was the ping flood. But if we kind of put that on a stack for a moment, gRPC is a layer 7 protocol that does stuff. And they have this thing called BDP estimation. And this is a direct quote from this website that says the idea is simple and powerful. Every time you receive some data, send out a H2 ping frame, and then look at the response and do some calculation and estimate the BDP, which is pretty cool. But what it results in is a ping every data frame, which is very much like a ping flood, and that introduces a interesting interaction between some implementations. And the fun thing is that Rust has a library that implements HB2 called Hyper, and they have a feature called Adaptive Window that directly was influenced by the gRPC BDP behavior. So we had a situation where the Rust Hyper client would speak to the Cloudflare Edge and get closed. The DOS mitigation would close them because it would detect an attack. And that wasn't great, but we were able to detect these things and understand them by analyzing them in things like Wireshark or other tooling, and work with the community to implement a fix. And the fix here was to not be as aggressive in that pinging. And the outcome of that activity is that actually it was friendlier to the server. The client was friendlier to the servers that it was speaking to, and also the BDP actually got better. Everything got better. So that was a net win. There's a different problem that we had. We launched something called Speed.Cloudflare a while back, and this let people test how fast, in terms of throughput, their upload or the download was, and what their ping and jitter was like. Shortly after we launched that, we had reports that people on very high-speed internet access were seeing kind of deflated upload figures compared to other such speed tests that behaved or acted differently. So we did some investigation here, and what we found is that there was a difference between just HB 1.1 and HB 2 upload performance. So that ruled out anything lower layer, both using TCP, both using IP, everything else pretty similar. So the difference there was solely between 1.1 and 2. And through that investigation, what we found is that it was due to HB2 flow control. And this is quite just a basic thing. It was there hidden in plain sight that the server was just not giving enough flow control to the client, causing these deflated figures. So my colleague did some work on this, looking at different buffer sizes, different window sizes. We settled upon an auto-tune solution, pretty similar to what TCP does already, but at the layer 7. And by deploying this, we were able to see like immediate improvements, which was again a very good win. But it really makes me question why such a basic problem was there for so long. No one had detected it, which makes me wonder, what are we measuring when we do anything like this? Are we measuring layer 4, layer 7, the whole thing? What's the methodology to detecting bottlenecks or performance impediments beyond the ideal? Like I say here, layers below HB will affect its performance. But even if your lower layers perform well, they aren't indicative of upper layer success. And this kind of environment is, and the observations we'd seen was our motivation to making a submission to the IAB measuring network quality workshop that happened last year. And we'll say, on top of just throughput stuff, latency and jitter are fundamental problems. The HB protocols are very latency sensitive or responsiveness sensitive. And that's why we're super happy that the work in the IPPM on responsiveness under working conditions has been adopted now, and is making good progress about testing the whole stack, including HB2 implementations. These are the protocols that real people use when they use web services, and we need to be able to characterize them and understand where there's bottlenecks or performance improvement possibilities. But beyond all of that, to quote Harry Potter, life isn't fair. It isn't just streams and requests and responses. There's a whole evolution of things happening at HTTP, turning it into more of a substrate. It's always been a substrate for things, but through the definition of the HB datagrams and capsule protocol that's been happening in the mass working group, and that work is now done, just awaiting publication, we're able to provide even more extreme use cases, to use a word. So UDP 443 could be the future of everything, is what I'm trying to indicate here. On top of reliable stream data, we have quick datagram frames, which allow for the use of unreliable datagrams in HTTP. In combination with the capsule protocol, we're able to do new things like proxying UDP over HTTP, which is what Mask has been working on. They're now focusing more on proxying IP over HTTP, which is interesting too. We also have the Web Transport Working Group and the Media over Quick Working Group, all trying to find new and exciting ways to use these protocols, which again makes me even more interested in the kinds of edge cases or specific problems that might occur to them, and that we need to empower everybody who might use these protocols to be able to understand what's going wrong, not just the developers who are working on them right now, or the experts who will be running those implementations or edge services for the next few years. We need to scale this up to end users who have some technical knowledge and want to use these things. This is an example that takes it to the extreme of multiple hop proxies that tunnel quick over quick. In terms of layer cake, that is even more complicated. And I won't go into it now because my brain hurts. But we want to come back to the layer 4 3/4. One moment. This is the conclusion of the talk. You'll be happy to hear. The intersection, the Venn diagram between layer 7 and 4 would obviously include other layers, except that they don't really exist in practice. So this is where the quirks are. But I have many remaining questions. I can tell you that there'll be things there that will go wrong, and we might fix some, but there'll be more. It's an unknown unknown, maybe, to use that horrible analogy. But what I want to focus on is, how can we get better as an internet community at finding the things? We know where they are. How do we find them? How can we get better at fixing them in a more faster, more robust way? And how can we get better at documenting them? Do any of these things need protocol changes? I think probably not, but we don't know until we find them. That's it. That's my call to action. We need to scale this up beyond just IETF people in this conference venue this week. So with that, I'll conclude my talk. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been great to share my mind with people.
Lucas, thank you very much for giving the talk. This is just as entertaining the second time around for me. Look, I know we're over time, but I would like to entertain a couple of questions. I don't see anybody in the chat queue, and I have one or two that I could ask, but I'm looking at the room. Is there anybody in the room who wishes to ask? And while people are thinking about it, let me ask you this. So if having seen this now for the second time and having had a few conversations with you, I feel like there's 3 buckets of things happening. There's this notion of measuring issues that have cross-layer components, diagnosing problems, and signaling somehow between layers. Or do you have a sense, I mean, from your perspective, working on the ground, is there a priority order to these? I think is the first question. The second is, do you have a sense, are we talking about a new set of standards here that need to be evolved, or is it something maybe that the formal methods and verification community can attack some of these things, as we might discuss in this afternoon session?
Those are all excellent questions. I would say the best way I can answer that is that typically the way that most HTTP servers work is that they would log request logs, which are a very high level view of the kind of the response status code that was sent when a request came in, with some information about that, and maybe some headers, the user agent, things like this. On the client side, you just get the result, maybe that error code I showed in Chrome. You can enable additional debug tooling, so you could look at a dev tool, open that up, and maybe capture a HAR file. Those give a bit more information about the request headers and response headers that were sent, but they don't go into any of the framing, like this eponymous layer 4 3/4. To do that, you'd need to maybe enable the Chrome netlog, which would capture stuff. But then you're getting into almost, per packet tracing, and that is voluminous. It's large. It's hard to read through quickly, and when it goes wrong, it's often these things are multiple requests all in a single connection. So if one request fails, it could be due to something unrelated that failed in that connection, due to maybe an implementation bug or an implementation choice that was defined in the specification that implementations must decide. And often they will, but they won't document why that decision was made It might be there in the code, in a comment, but we're not all experts in every language and know where to look for these things. So just capturing these things is hard. It's a hard problem to solve because of the data that's required. I know Facebook, as an example, uses QLog in production and does capture a lot of these kind of events in real time, but I think that's beyond the capabilities of a lot of deployments. So it could be that we need a way to think about how to do logging on demand or sampling or tracing of things. But again, it's tricky. I don't have many answers in this. I have ways that I know how to work myself, but those aren't necessarily applicable to everybody. I don't think this is something that can happen in the specifications themselves, but maybe we do a good job with automated testing, say for interop in the quick working group, but that focuses very much on the transport layer. Maybe there's more room to integrate some of those tools I talked about earlier into more of an automated kind of view.
Very good. Okay, we seem to have one question on the floor. Please introduce yourself and then we'll move on. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Dobby and I work in the kitchens at Gringotts on packets, and I do exist, and I would love to have been in the FCC room when you attempted to discuss delay and jitter without mentioning packets or lower layers. That would have been very entertaining because magic requires packets.
Thank you for the comment there. I would say please go and see the FCC proposal. I can't remember the right name here, but these requests for comments that were made, like this was a public consultation. I think Mark will probably correct me if I'm wrong here, but yeah, this is my opinion of things. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just this view, and a lot of my colleagues did a good job of trying to articulate all of the areas related to broadband nutrition.
Great, Lucas. Thank you very much. I think there's George Michelson in the queue. I noticed at the last minute. I'm hoping he can reach out to you to ask a question if that question stands, but I'd like to move on in the meantime. Let's see, looking for the next presenter. Hold on. Where did you go? Let's see. Safiki Islam, are you in the room?
Yes.
Okay, show is yours. Welcome.
Yeah, can you hear me, guys? Hi, good morning. My name is Shafiqul, and I'm going to present, is it really necessary to go beyond a fairness metric for next generation congestion control? This is joint work with Christian, Karsten, and Michael from University of Oslo. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. Can I do it from here? Oh, yeah, right, sorry. Never used it, that's why. Yeah, sorry for the trouble. Traditionally, the evaluation of fairness and the evaluation of congestion control mechanisms encompasses an examination of fairness. This is done by calculating throughputs from of competing flows from experiments or simulations, and this data vector is fed to an equation right here, and a singular vector Jane's fairness index is calculated. Here, n is the total number of flows, and xi is the throughput of the ith connection. So the concept has been used to judge how multiple instances of the same congestion control mechanism interoperate in heterogeneous and homogeneous set of conditions. And this is also used to evaluate whether a new congestion control mechanism is fit for deployment on the internet. And this is done by evaluating fairness when a new mechanism competes with the prevalent congestion control mechanisms, traditionally Reno, more recently Cubic. 15 years ago, Bob Briscoe introduced the term flow rate fairness in his CCR paper. And he argues that fairness should be defined in relation to cost per economic entity, not per flow. However, even after 15 years of publication, it is still common to evaluate mechanisms on the basis of flow rate fairness. What happened? Could you please share the slides again? Yeah, I still don't have, yeah, got it. Yep. So the question is, does such a fairness test indeed provide a good reasoning about the deployment of a new congestion control mechanism? So in a recent hotnet paper, where et al. Suggested to use the harm concept, that is, how harmful a new congestion control algorithm is to prevalent congestion control algorithms. So they suggested that throughput alone should not be used as a performance metric. Developers should also focus on various performance metrics such as delay, loss, and flow completion time. So the harm concept is practical, seems practical, but its practical merit hasn't been explored and demonstrated because this requires more experimental data than the calculation of Jane's fairness index. So we provide the first evaluation of using a fairness metric versus using harm with representative congestion control mechanisms. So the outline from now on, first I will introduce how to calculate harm, and then we'll present the representation that is suitable for comparison of harm and fairness metric. And also we'll introduce our measurement setup and results. So the paper suggested many ways of calculating harm. The one that is fit for deployment from the harm paper they mentioned, we suggest that if the harm done by a new congestion control algorithm alpha to a widely deployed congestion control algorithm beta is comparable or less than the harm done when beta competes against beta, we should consider it acceptable to deploy. So based on this, we carry out two tests for all our scenarios. First, in the first test, we use flow alpha, a new congestion control mechanism competing with flow beta, which is the baseline congestion control algorithm. In the second test, two baseline flows, beta 1 and beta 2, competing with each other. And we map from a flow to specific measurements as m:flow metric value. So we actually presented a linear representation of the flow. The equation is available in our paper. And it's the still old slide. Anyway, so what we did, we ran two experiments. For experiment 1 has this alpha flow and versus beta flow. And the fairness metrics is calculated from, MF is calculated from M alpha and M beta. And from the experiment 2, where we have beta 1 and beta 2 flow completing, we took M beta from experiment 1 and M beta 1 from experiment 2 and calculated the harm metric from here. The negative value corresponds to alpha causing much more harm to beta, where the positive values represents beta harms alpha when they compete, and 0 means no harm. So our measurement setup we ran experiments in UIO's teacup physical testbed, where we varied the link capacity to 10, 25, 50, 75, and 100 megabits per second. And the round trip time was varied to 10, 20, 50, and 100 milliseconds. And queue size was set to half a BDP and a full BDP for each bandwidth and delay case. We chose 4 different congestion control mechanisms based on their level of aggression and the congestion signal they use. The first one is Renault, that is very traditional, and then we chose, and it's a loss-based mechanism. Then we chose Cubic, which is more aggressive than Renault, and also a loss-based mechanism. Then BBR, which is more aggressive than Renault and Cubic, and Vegas, which is the least aggressive here, and primarily a delay-based mechanism. So results we show in 3 categories. We investigate harm metric for Cubic versus Renault and Cubic versus BBR flows. We investigate how the harm metric behave when we run a loss-based flow against a delay-based flow. And we share experience whether the deployability of new congestion control mechanisms could be judged by a harm-based approach. So first thing, we try to identify and eliminate scenarios where Cubic falls back to linear TCP-like growth. The heat maps here show the whole parameter space, where we found the interesting cases at RTT, when RTT is above 50 milliseconds and capacity is greater than 75 megabits per second, where Cubic doesn't fall back to linear TCP-like growth. And we call this from now on the high BDP scenario. And in case of low BDP scenario, we found no difference in the fairness and harm because Cubic behaved similar to Renault. So this is the result of harm versus fairness distribution of CDF of MH throughput values for different alpha beta pairs. It could be seen that the black line, Cubic does moderate harm to Renault. BBR does significant harm to Cubic, whereas Renault harms the most to Vegas.
Damn it. Sorry, my fault with preparing for the next speaker and I clicked the wrong button. Apologies, Safiq. Here you go.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so this shows the harm metric for different alpha versus beta pairs. And then we look at the relative harm and fairness distribution. We normalize the MF and MH fairness and harm values for varied alpha Cubic and beta Renault pairs. And here it could be seen that the MH throughput and fairness metric, it's not like obvious like to see the differences here, but if you look at the MH RTT metric, the impact of Cubic on Renault is quite visible. When in case of throughput metric, it wasn't. And then we ran the same test, similar test with BBR versus Cubic pair. The impact of RTT is still there, but the MF and MH, there's a pronounced gap in between. And this is because fairness is quantifying as measurement as the equal capacity sharing links. In case of Renault competing with Renault, it provides kind of better fairness. When Cubic competes with Cubic, it's not. And it's kind of Cubic is a complex and modal algorithm. So that's why there is a gap here. And then we ran the same test, similar test, with and looked at the normalized MF and MH values and for the Vegas alpha competing against Reno beta flow. And this is across the entire parameter space. And the MF values is slight to the left. This is because the unfairness issues in Vegas, because of a simple delay-based mechanism has some unfairness issues, such as latecomer advantage. And finally, we look at the case study of absolute fairness and harm, where we look at two scenarios that are relevant with regards to deployment of new congestion control algorithms. In the first scenario, we look at the case where the introduction of cubic in the prevalent, when Reno was dominant. And in the second scenario, we look at the case where BBR supersedes cubic. And then we calculate harm metric from these two values, where we take M beta from experiment 1 and M alpha from experiment 2 to calculate harm metric. And then we look at the absolute fairness and harm, throughput harm comparison between alpha cubic beta Reno and alpha cubic gamma BBR in cases of high BDP scenarios. And we show the raw harm values here. And it could be seen that BBR captures more resources than cubic captures for Reno, in all cases. And more specifically, it shows that BBR captures 1.6 times more resources for 50% of the cases. So to conclude, we say that, it's an old slide. So we applied the harm concept to data produced from experiments and with competing pairs of various TCP variants. We looked at 4 different TCP variants based on their level of aggression as well as different feedback types. We presented a linear representation of harm to better assess differences between the metrics. We also illustrated the efficacy of harm-based approach using experimental result that we showed. In future, we plan to investigate the efficacy of harm using other performance metrics such as loss. So to conclude, we say that the harm-based approach is more useful to assess whether a next generation congestion control mechanism is safely deployable or not. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have a quick question they want to ask? I'm going to try and recover some time. I'm going to ask you just a quick question here is, so I think harm is gaining some traction, which is lovely to see. Do you have any thoughts on how to evaluate this in the real world? In addition to so the analytical tools are developing, and you know, at scale, small things tend to show up that don't show up at small scale or on paper. It's more of an open, unfair question, I realize.
That's a very good question, to be honest.
Okay.
So, I mean, like this requires, as I mentioned, many experimental data to test it, and harm itself is kind of complex to do it because it's not easy to calculate, and there are many approaches presented in the paper to do it. So we chose the one that we found kind of fitting for figuring out if it can be safely deployed or not. So if you want to do it in real life experiments, we need more experiments and more data. So if you can do it, it's possible to do it, but it's like it's like extra traffic that you need to impose to compare against.
Thank you very much, Sefakul. Very good. Next up, Jan Evang. Fabulous. Thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. I'd love to see harm get more traction on a personal level.
There was one more question.
I want to ask one more question, if possible. Sorry, I can't.
No, please go ahead. Ask it quickly. You're at the mic.
Okay. My name is Yoshi from Amazon Web Service. So I just would like to have a simple clarification question. So when you compare cubic Reno and Reno, do they have the same round trip time, or do they have a different round trip time?
Oh yeah, we do. The experimental setups or settings, like they were like the same when we compare against, right? Because like each case, they will be compared with the same case scenario.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like it's going to be unfair, right?
Yeah, I know. But this is because, Reno affects the round trip time drastically. So when two flows has a different round trip time, then bandwidth share is completely different. But on the other hand, in the case of cubic, the congestion window growth doesn't affect the round trip time very much. So that means it's really difficult comparison between when you think about comparing cubic and Reno for fairness. That's from my point of view.
So Sefakul, I'm going to interrupt here and say that's a fabulous question. It's worth thinking about, Sefakul, and I would encourage you to interact offline.
Okay, we'll take it offline. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on. Cloud cross-layer network outage classification. Jan, I believe you're at the podium. Fabulous. Thank you for joining. All yours.
Hello. Let's see. Hello, everybody. My name is Jan Marius Evang. I'm a PhD student at the Oslo Metropolitan University, and I'll be presenting this paper on behalf of my research team at Simula Metropolitan. So the paper is called Cross-Layer Network Outage Classification Using Machine Learning, which should be more or less self-explanatory. We want to classify network outages in an IP network using data collected from various network layers using machine learning methods. Let's see, yeah. So the paper focuses on real-world challenges of classifying network outages, and especially on providing good feedback to network operations for troubleshooting and to customer support for informing customers about what actually happened. So my first I introduce the test bed and the problem statement, and then I'll talk about the methods and the data we used. And finally, I'll present the results. So the network that we use for this analysis is a global network for quality-aware network traffic. Most of the customers here are video conferencing users who need very high quality video, sort of better quality than the internet can provide. The network is spanning 4 continents with 11 cities, 4 in Europe, 3 in North America, 3 in Asia, and 1 in Australia. And these cities are connected via leased layer 2 services from 3 different providers for redundancy. This is Telia, Cogent, and Equinix providing these layer 2 networks. The network connections are relatively low cost, which also means that the quality is less than what you would expect from the most expensive services. Yeah. So our research shows, or before we started researching, we knew that the network problems were quite frequent. We analyzed 2 years of data, and we found more than 700,000 packet loss incidents. These, for this number, every time we, during 1 minute measurement, lost a single packet, we counted it as packet loss incidents. So even this large number of incidents is actually well within the service level agreement for these services. But of course, not all of these turn into support cases, mostly because of routing protocols that protected against outages. But altogether, during that time period, the operators saw 2,855 customer support cases that were related to network quality. And we found that out of these, only around 35% actually received a proper response from customer service regarding what was the actual problem that happened. And this is a far too low number, so that's why this project was initiated. So first, we started collecting data. We used SNMP polling from all the routers and switches to collect the optical signal strength from the links to the providers and internal links. We also used SNMP to collect interface error counters and buffer overflow counters. And we got access to all the information about software crash logs. We actually noticed 62 instances of core dumps in the in the management plane of these routers and switches. And surprisingly, none of those actually led to any customer complaints. We also got access to the configuration change logs, which was an early hypothesis that configuration changes made problems. But in the end, we found that we needed more data. So we set up BFD logging. BFD is a binary forwarding, bidirectional forwarding detection protocol, quite a lightweight protocol that's implemented on all these routers. It's usually implemented on the interface cards, so it doesn't stress the CPU in the router. And in this case, it was actually already implemented and in use for the higher level protocols. It actually provides a very simple measurement. It's sending packets and it triggers an event if packets are not received. And this improves the failover times for higher protocols like ISIS. And we also set up layer 2 packet loss and layer 3 packet loss measurements using UDP ping. This required quite a lot of virtual machines set up, quite high CPU usage compared to the BFD protocols that were very easy, where the data was very easy to generate, easy to process, and easy to store in a centralized location. Yeah, and in addition to this data, we got access to the customer complaints data, anonymized, of course, and to the customer support responses to those cases. First, we created a tool to visualize all the data. This data was very useful, both for the network operations center and for the customer support, but it required a lot of training and a lot of manual pattern recognition to recognize what data is actually wrong, what happened, what was the cause of these customer complaints. And this is obviously a case for machine learning, pattern recognition. So then we initiated a machine learning program to try and use this data to automatically classify outages. Yeah. The first step in this process was to do an in-depth analysis of all the outages or all the customer cases where customers complained about outages. And we identified the root cause of all the complaints, and we identified what sort of data was most useful to finding the root cause. From this list, you can see that multiple outages in multiple layer 2 providers at the same time tops the list. And the reason for that is that outages in a single provider usually didn't cause any customer complaints because the routing protocols were quite good at rerouting in those cases. We can also see that most of these outages were caused by layer 2 issues. So yeah, just a very, very quick introduction. I guess everybody knows machine learning, basic, but for completeness. Basic goal of machine learning is to take a lot of data points and divide them into 2 groups. The data points in this case are, of course, multidimensional with lots of data input, and the processes run multiple times to create multiple classes. We use the support vector machine method, which is basically, as you see from the diagram here, it transforms the data so that the decision boundary is as big as possible, the dotted lines. This method is more useful at classifying new data that it hasn't seen before, and it's less susceptible to the machine learning problem of overfitting. So what we found was that a 2-stage machine learning process was the optimal solution for this case. In the first stage, we identified the most common outages, which were layer 2 outages, using BFD data only. BFD data is very easy to collect, as mentioned, and it's got very little impact on any equipment or any network. And for many real-life implementations, this might actually be good enough for to do, even for smaller operators with little resources. Collecting BFD trap data and analyzing them would be a good idea. And then, but of course, BFD being a layer 2 protocol, it could not detect all types of outages or root causes. So then we added the UDP ping data, both layer 2 and layer 3 UDP ping data, and we managed to do a very quite good classification of all the other causes as well. And these, but this data is much more. It's much harder to collect the data. It requires a lot of virtual machines. It requires a lot of CPU processing to actually collect the data. While the entire machine learning process to classify them is fast. It took less than 1 second to classify a case. So on to the results of the classification. On the left here, we see the first stage classification. We used 75% of all the data for training our machine learning systems, and we then tested the machine learning system on the remaining 25% and recorded the success rates in classifying those. And perfect classification would be 100% on all the diagonal cells. So we see here on the left that it had a very good accuracy where it worked. And for the other non-layer 2 cases, it needed the second step. And there we removed all the ones where the first stage was successful, and we also removed where the issue was obviously on the customer side. So there were no errors detected anywhere. And then we come up with results on the right. They're not quite as good, but and the reason for this is that some of these root causes have very similar symptoms. Like it's very hard for by just looking at the symptoms only to see the difference between equipment maintenance and equipment failure, for instance. So to summarize, machine learning proved to be very well suited to classifying outages in this network. And using BFD as an MP traps to log the layer 2 events was also very useful. But we needed the UDP packet measurements to classify problems in the other layers. So then
Thank you, Jan. Any questions for Jan? So I will note very quickly so that we can move on. Being machine learning in a network capacity, it's still some proving. There's a bit of a proving ground here. People are always uncomfortable with what they don't fully understand, and in the networking space, this is only more important, of course, right? Because I think we all recognize that this is sort of a crucial service that we run. Do you have a sense of where this might go wrong?
Yeah, well, yeah, that question is the nice things about our setup here is that it has very little impact on the actual network. There's no automatic decisions made based on machine learning. There's very little configuration changes to the equipment. All these protocols, all the events created by the protocols were already in use. They were used by the ISI's protocol, VXLAN protocols to make decisions about fast rerouting. The only thing we needed to do was to actually send SNMP traps when something happened. And
That's a fair point to make. Sorry, go ahead.
And also the main outputs for this was information for the network operation center and the customer support centers to provide manual help in troubleshooting things and to inform customers. When somebody calls in and you can tell them immediately, yes, we see the problem, we know more or less what it is. That's a much better customer experience than if you say, Yeah, we don't know what happened. We'll let you know once we know something. That's not a very good answer.
Fair point to make. Thank you very much, Jan. Aitor, are you in the room or remote? I believe that's you that just passed by the mic. You have control. Thank you.
Yeah, here. Can you all hear me? Yep.
Yep.
All good? All right. Okay. So hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Aitor Martin. I come from the University of Stavanger in Norway. And I'm here to present our work titled On the Suitability of BBR Congestion Control for Quick over Geo-SATCOM Networks. So I'm going to start with a little introduction on the topic. So the first thing we want to say is that geosynchronous satellite communication networks are becoming interesting items to provide satellite broadband connectivity in many 5G and 6G use cases that use satellites for backhauling purposes or hybrid schemes, etc. And in parallel, we're witnessing how the transport layer is going through some breakthrough. We're seeing Quick being standardized, deployed, and developed further. And we're also seeing how modern congestion control is also being worked on, mainly with BBR congestion control. So in this, with this ecosystem here, we're seeing how there is more and more quick traffic on the web, and we expect more quick traffic going through satellite networks. So this is where we stand. So why is this important here? There are some challenges that satellite networks introduce for the transport layer. We have mainly long propagation delay, we have propagation errors as well, and we also have likely bandwidth asymmetry on the link. And TCP traffic is usually optimized for satellite links using the performance enhancing proxies that you all might know, called PEPs. However, unless some network assisted solution is introduced, such as MASC, Quick cannot use PEPs because Quick headers are encrypted. So the problem here is that many studies have looked into TCP with PEP, and it has been shown that TCP with PEPs really greatly outperforms Quick right now. Even with Quick's fast handshake, Quick really falls behind. So there's been a raising interest into looking into improving Quick for this SATCOM use case. So in this context, we're going to look into the general performance of BBR over SATCOM, and with Quick, of course. And we're also going to look into aspects such as fairness, and we're also going to look into these items that I mentioned, like packet loss, bandwidth asymmetry, and also how the Quick implementation choice makes a difference here. So now, for some background, these are the three main properties that I mentioned about the satellite links. We have a long round trip time that implies a longer protocol feedback, which affects the transport layer on many different aspects. And it also implies a higher bandwidth delay product, which implies also larger buffers. Then we also have propagation errors and finally the bandwidth asymmetry that I mentioned. This bandwidth asymmetry can be especially problematic if the uplink gets congested and AX cannot reach the sender smoothly. This can really limit the forward throughput performance. So there have been a lot of proposals on this area to try to improve Quick. I'm not going to go into them, but I want to make clear that we're focused on looking into BBR. So just quickly talk about BBR. What BBR does is it measures the bottleneck bandwidth and round trip time on the link in order to find an optimal sending rate that tries to maximize the use of the link while keeping the path RTT as low as possible. And well, BBR have been shown to do really well in many use cases when compared to Cubic, especially when there is losses on the path, etc. However, there are some issues that have been found with BBR that are related to mainly fairness. It has been shown that BBR flows can be quite unfair against each other, and also BBR flows can really be quite aggressive towards loss-based congestion control, such as Cubic, as well as RTT unfairness. So after this, there was an update to BBR and BBR2 that tried to fix these issues, tried to make BBR a bit less aggressive while keeping performance high. And this was made by making BBR react to packet loss and explicit congestion notification, among other improvements. And there have been a wide range of research papers into this, looking into both BBR versions and comparing different congestion control. But we saw that there was no paper looking into the latest version of BBR with Quick and over SATCOM. So this is where we stepped in with our research. So now we're going to show you the experimental setup that we built. Yep, so this here is what we built. We built a testbed based on TCAP. We have 2 pairs of hosts to generate quick traffic. And we have a router that performs link emulation. And the experiments are controlled using what we call the TCAP controller. The TCAP platform developed by Kaya allows to design experiments and automate tests really easily. And we took it and extended it to be able to work with Quick and to extract statistics as well as QLog trace data. To emulate the satellite link, we use NetM. And we set up 2 different scenarios, with the satellite scenario, which is our main focus, and the terrestrial scenario. So we're using a 600 milliseconds RTT for the satellite link, and for the terrestrial link, 100 milliseconds. We have a 20 megabits per second downlink bandwidth. And as you can see, for the satellite scenario, we also contemplate the asymmetric possibility of having 20 on the downlink and 2 on the uplink. And we also look into different bottleneck buffer sizes and packet loss ratio values as well. We use 2 quick implementations. These are NGTCP2, which we chose because it is the one that allows us to experiment with BBR2 with the latest version. And we also use PicoQuick, which has been shown in some studies that it performs quite well over SATCOM. So this is why we also wanted to look into this. So yeah, that's it. So now to jump to our results, we set up 4 different experimental scenarios. The first of these is the single flow bulk download. Here we start the download of a very large file from the client. And we let the download run for 2 minutes, and then we measure goodput on the link. And yeah, and this is what we saw. So first of all, here we show you our goodput results on the satellite and terrestrial scenario, and for different buffer sizes with the 2 implementations that I talked about. So clearly, as expected, we see performance being lower in the satellite scenario. And we also see how PicoQuick is doing significantly better than NGTCP2 in both use cases, but especially in the satellite use case. If we look into congestion control differences, we also see how for NGTCP2, Cubic is gaining some advantage for higher buffer sizes, while BBR versions remain stable along buffer sizes. And we can see how BBR2 is giving us a slightly lower goodput values, which can be expected due to its less aggressive nature. So then we introduced some packet loss to see their impact, and mainly we saw two things. We first saw how NGTCP2 with Cubic was losing a lot of performance, especially in the long RTT satellite scenario. And also when we increased the packet loss even further to 1%, we saw BBR2 actually falling behind BBR1 a lot. And we only see this in the satellite scenario. So we believe that this mixture of long RTT and high packet loss is problematic for BBR2 here. So finally, for this scenario, we also looked into introducing some traffic on the uplink in order to see how the problem of the asymmetric bandwidth could have an impact here. And we tried different combinations of congestion control algorithms. And we saw that while NGTCP2 drops in performance a lot, as you can see here on this good put results, that when you use this asymmetric bandwidth setup, we lose a lot of performance. On the other hand, when we use PicoQuick, here, we are maintaining really good performance even when there's congestion on the uplink. So we looked into this and we saw that PicoQuick is actually using a different ACK policy where it tries to send less acknowledgement packets, and it tries to optimize this for the satellite link. So this is why we stress the relevance of these ACK strategies. So then we also looked into fairness of simultaneous flows, running down different flows at the same time. And for this, we use Jens fairness index to measure how fair parallel flows are against each other. So this is what we saw. We saw Cubic maintaining really good fairness, even with 64 parallel flows. However, our results showed that BBR2 and BBR1 flows competing against each other, against themselves, sorry, drop a lot in fairness when we increase the number of flows, especially with BBR1. We do see that BBR2 does a bit better, but still the fairness values here are quite not good as compared to Cubic here. Then we also compared congestion control algorithms against each other with parallel flows using different congestion control algorithms. And here, mainly what we want to address is that BBR2 with Cubic is behaving quite fairly, which is showing that even with the long RTT, BBR2 has managed to improve these fairness issues that BBR1 had towards Cubic. However, if you look at the blue box plots on the right that show BBR1 against Cubic, you see quite worse results. I'm going to go a little bit faster. So for the latecomer, we also looked into the latecomer issue where latecomer flows struggle to join the link, and they are either too aggressive or they fall behind. So we set up a 4-flow scenario where different flows starts at different times and they all run for 3 minutes. And yeah, this is what we saw. So here we show you the good put over time over 5 minutes of 4 different flows that start at 0, 40, 80, and 120 seconds. And we also show you the RTT measured there in the graph. And as you can see, Cubic latecomers are quite slow because of the satellite RTT. They take really long to converge to a fair share. However, as you will see on the next slide, the picture changes a bit when we use BBR. So when we use BBR here, we see how the latecomers join the link faster and they get a fair share faster than with Cubic. And as you can see here, it's also pretty notable that with BBR2, these latecomers are less aggressive, while BBR1 latecomers actually overtake the previous flows, and they make previous flows drop in performance quite a lot. However, we did see an issue here with BBR2, where BBR2, after the rest of the flows end, it fails to recover the available bandwidth. And we have seen that this is a consequence of the long RTT, because we repeated these experiments with lower RTT and this doesn't happen. So we believe this might be either some problem with BBR2 for long RTTs or perhaps some implementation issues with NGTCP2 and BBR2. So yeah, I'm gonna jump to the discussion. There was one last scenario to look into. If you're interested into it, you can read the paper or we can talk about it later, but I wanna be a bit quicker here. So to give a general idea of what we can conclude from this study, we have seen that BBR can provide better performance under lossy links. And while BBR1 is the one that's giving us the best performance, BBR2 is doing a great job at improving fairness towards Cubic for better coexistence on the internet and better behavior. However, there are some problems that BBR2 has to face for these satellite networks. And yeah, we believe this needs to be further looked into. We also saw really how this problem with bandwidth asymmetry and ACK frames on the return path can be a problem, because we were seeing NGTCP2 having problems to deal with this. And this is why we stress the need to look into ACK policies, satellite optimized ACK policies that try to negotiate strategies with that send less ACKs and try to avoid these issues. So to summarize, even though BBR seems like a good candidate for some reasons, there is some stuff to work into here. And as I said, bandwidth asymmetry is proving to be a great challenge for satellite links. And we're also surprised to see PicoQuick doing so well with their satellite optimizations. And we believe looking into these strategies that they use might be clue for Quick over Satcom in the future.
Sure, thank you. This is great, well presented, and thank you for accelerating towards the end and recovering some time. I think what I would like to do is just move on, but encourage you please to check the chat channel, because I think you've had some good engagement and a couple of thoughts of questions. There are certainly a couple of things in here that are counterintuitive, and I think the observation about ACK patterns is particularly novel. And so if people in the Quick Working Group are not in the room, you might want to reach out to them. Lucas, for example, who just gave the keynote, and might have something to offer there. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you.
Moving on to our last short presentation. Let's see. Nushin, are you in the room?
Yes. Hi.
Control is yours. Take it away.
Yes. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this presentation. I'm Nushin Iqbal. I'm a PhD student at the University of Alberta. And for this project, I worked with my supervisor, Dr. Paul Liu. And the project is titled Parity-Aware Forward Correction for HTTP. The thing is that when the HTTP client asks for a web page, there is a list of web resources that need to be downloaded. but not all resources are the same. For example, we have images that can be rendered incrementally at the client side. So we can use the multi-streaming or multiplexing of Quick to avoid the head-of-line blocking problem at an application layer in the case of packet loss. But there are also other types of web resources like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that need to be downloaded completely before getting used. So we call them high priority resources. And in this project, we have the idea of using forward action for these high priority resources over HTTP3, because in the case of packet loss, the client needs to wait for the retransmission of the lost parts as a function of RTT. But by using forward correction, we can recover sooner and we can reduce page load time, hopefully. The thing is that to implement this idea, we need the priority of different resources at the server side or the sender side. And we previously had a complicated dependency tree prioritization scheme for HTTP, but because of its complexity, it hasn't been widely used. But recently, with the extensible prioritization scheme, the client can set the priority scores of web resources so the server would know which ones are high priority, and then we can use forward correction for them. And actually, for the forward correction part over Quick, it's not a new thing. Quick had forward correction, but for our data initially. And because of the overhead of forward correction, it was dropped. But the idea here is that we can use them only for high priority resources. And for the paper that we submitted to this journal, we have the numbers over UDP-based data transfer or UDT protocol, and we use two-dimensional X or base forward correction. But after we got positive reviews from the workshop, we were encouraged to implement this idea over Quick, and we have chosen NGTCP2 as one of the open source implementations out there because it includes the recent extensions to Quick, like the extensible prioritization scheme that we need for this project. And to further simplify the task, we pre-computed the repair data and wrote them in a file at the server side. So in the scenario that we want to use forward correction for high priority resources, the client needs to ask for that as a web resource as well to be able to use them for recovering lost Quick frames. And for the forward correction part, we use the OpenFetch open source library that has the implementation of Reed-Solomon and LDPC encoders and decoders. And we use an emulated testbed over EmuLab, and we use NetMTC tool to add delay and packet loss to the link. Here are some early results of setting 100 milliseconds for the RTT and 10% for the packet loss. And these two diagrams show the arrival order of Quick frames at HTTP client without forward correction and with forward correction. As a workload, we had a very simple workload of only one high priority resource, the green one. And when we computed the repair data for this high priority resource, we got a file 1.8 kilobyte, the yellow file. And then we also had another web resource, the low priority incremental resource, the pink one, with 26.5 kilobyte. And the upper diagram showed what would happen at the client side when we do not use forward correction for the high priority resource. We have the Quick frames for the high priority, the green one, and because we have packet loss in the network, one of the Quick frames, the green one, got lost, so we need to wait for 103 milliseconds to receive the retransmission of that lost Quick frames. And we also could finish the whole job at 320 milliseconds. But with forward correction, the client needs to ask for the high priority resource, the repair data, and also the ping resource. And the thing is that we could recover the two lost frames of the green high priority resource at 7 milliseconds using two redundant data Quick frames. So while if we wanted to wait for the retransmission, we need to wait for 109 milliseconds, and we could finish the whole job at 312. And the improvement is 7 milliseconds versus 103 milliseconds without forward correction. And as a summary, we said that we can use resource prioritization as the server side to use forward correction only for high priority resources, and this way we can reduce page load time. And as a future work, we are trying to improve our implementation of our quick, and we need to study the congestion control impacts of using forward correction. Thank you very much for listening, and I would be happy if there's any questions or suggestions.
Thank you very much, Nisheen. Any questions at the mic? I think the only question I would raise here is the 10% packet loss.
Yeah. The only reason that we chose this high percent is to see the impact on this small size, low, high priority resource, because we had only 7 quick frames here, and we wanted to make sure that at least one of them got lost. But of course, if you have a large file, we can reduce it to, for example, 1%, and you could see the impact. That's okay. A good way. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Only saying so because I don't know that anyone has seen really that high pack, but I see the reasoning. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you. Let me check the chat channel quickly. I think we are in the clear. Thanks, Nisheen, and thanks everybody for attending. Please return around 3 p.m. where we have an excellent set of talks waiting to be given. Something new for the IRTF. Thanks everybody for joining. See you soon.